Welcome back to the thrilling conclusion of episode 2 of our podcast series, Thieves, Rogues, and Renegades. This one titled The Battle of Ocracoke Inlet, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Murder Blackbeard. We're going to pick up where we left off with the arrival of all-around dick and company man Alexander Spotswood. But before we get into that one, I want you all to take a second and click the subscribe button on our video. That way you can follow all the new stuff we put up on YouTube. We will be updating this regularly, not just with the episodes that you can hear on our podcast, but with some other stuff we're going to be shooting in the near future. We look forward to seeing you all, and without further ado, here we are, part 2. Enjoy.
With all good times comes the buzzkill. Enter Alexander Spotswood, governor of the Crown Colony of Virginia. So, Spotswood's growing concern over the settlement of former, quote, pirates in the colony to his immediate south, and he didn't think very highly of Governor Eden. First, he knew Eden was corrupt, believed that Eden wouldn't do anything to combat any pirate presence that they might then prey on ships sailing to or from ports in Virginia. Secondly, Virginia at this time is a full crown colony. It's under control of the British Crown and Parliament. It's been around since 1607, whereas the Carolina colony, which at this point hadn't split into North and South, that happens in 1729, is still what's called a proprietary colony. It's established in 1670, and it's established by granting a charter to either a private individual or a company of private individuals that then administer the colony on their own dime in return for sending a portion of the profits to the British Crown. Spotswood didn't believe that the Carolina colony had the strength or the concentrated government authority to deal with their own security issues. So he gathers intelligence on Teach's whereabouts from former crew members that have taken the pardon, puts together a military expedition to take him into custody for trial or either kill him and to be done with the matter. Now, in this whole process, there's lawsuits, there's arguments in the court. It's basically like the longest second half of an episode of Law and Order that you've ever seen. There's counter lawsuits, people getting jailed and walking free. When we do our full biographical series on Blackbeard, we will get into this in detail. This is about the point where he gathers a force, a military force, including 2 Royal Navy frigates, HMS Lyme and HMS Pearl.
They were commandeered unarmed sloops.
Well, no, those weren't. We're going to get to that.
The Pearl,
these were the warships that the men were sourced from that actually commandeered these ships.
Yeah, because what was Maynard? He was lieutenant of
Maynard was the
Pearl.
Yes, he was the first lieutenant, the second in command of HMS Pearl.
Yeah.
So, in addition to these ships, he gathers a force of militia and sends them overland into North Carolina. This is a violation of Crown sovereignty, and sends them to Bath to arrest or kill Teach or any of his associates that may be in the town.
It should also be noted that Charles Eden was left out of the loop here.
Yeah, nobody told Eden.
Whoops.
Nobody told Eden. He knew when somebody came galloping up to the governor's mansion and said, yeah, there's 400 Virginia militiamen moving in a flying column towards Bath. I think you should know. So this is the point in the process where enter Lieutenant Robert Maynard. He's a 34-year-old. He's from Dartford, England. He's been in the Royal Navy since he was 12 years old. And now we get to talking about the fun part, the battle.
Yes.
So it's the 17th of November, 1718. Maynard is given command of 2 small 100-ton trading sloops that have been commandeered from civilian stocks in the Virginia ports. One sloop was called Ranger. That was placed under command of another officer named Mr. Hyde, midshipman, and the sloop Jane, which was under command of Maynard himself. 57 men from Pearl and Lyme were seconded to this force. They set sail from Concocton on the James River. They reached the edge of Ocracoke Inlet on the evening of the 21st of November. They decide to wait until the morning to attack because they are unfamiliar with the local geography and hydrography, and they don't have the greatest charts to deal with this part.
Yeah, if you've ever been to the Outer Banks, if you've ever been on that side, you know that the water is extremely shallow, and it's full of sandbars, and sandbars have a tendency to move.
Yes, they do. They do.
And if you're not familiar with it, it's really easy to get your ship run aground. It's easy to get stuck. Now, unfortunately for them, the man who probably knows that water better than anyone else
is the man they're coming to kill.
is the man they're trying to kill.
To get around the Outer Banks.
Blackbeard's home turf.
Yeah, to get around the Outer Banks, you need great charts. You need a lot of skill in navigation. The best idea would be to either hire or kidnap a pilot, somebody local who knew the waters well, and you have to take it slow. So at this point, they stop all traffic from entering the inlet to prevent possible warning of their presence. They post lookouts to prevent Teach from either escaping down the mainland or just sailing around the other side of the inlet. And this is going to sound a little complicated. We're going to post on social media a little map of the area just so you can get an idea of kind of the battlescape. And at daybreak, they set sail up the channel, going very slowly. They have a small boat preceding these two ships, taking soundings, depth measurements, to basically make sure they don't run aground. You know, these are small ships. They don't draw a lot of water. But we're in a part of the United States where, I mean, the shallow water is just extremely, extremely treacherous. Basically trying to make sure that the Ranger and the Jane didn't run aground. Now, at this point, we have a battle about to ensue. Let's look at the balance of power. Let's look at the things that are in Blackbeard's favor. He has familiarity with the local waters. He has a defensive position, so he can see these guys coming. He can react to their movements. And he has more firepower.
He has, at this point, technically, he's the only one with firepower.
He's the only one with firepower. Neither the Ranger or the Jane had cannons. Large cannons, anyway. They might have had small swivel guns, but they don't make any mention of those. And the Adventure has at least 8, possibly 9 cannons on it. And now we have what's in Maynard's favor. He has more men. He has 57 men. Teach has... The sources vary. So, the captain of the Pearl, a fellow named Brand, wrote an official report that stated that Teach had 19 men with him. Charles Johnson says he has 25 men with him, because most of his men were in Bath, North Carolina, or had been cast ashore. The only other advantage they really have is they have 2 ships, so they can maybe attack from 2 angles, if the depth of the channel allows it. So, Maynard's ships are approaching. Blackbeard's gunner, a guy named Philip Morton, fires a shot across the bow of the lead vessel as a warning. They don't stop. As the 2 vessels continue to approach, the Adventure clears for action, and Teach cuts his anchor cable. So, is able to turn the ship rapidly. Starboard battery, the battery on the right side of the ship, is now facing these approaching vessels, and he waits. Once they were within roughly 100 yards, Teach and Maynard start hailing each other through speaking trumpets. According to Maynard's report, "At our first salutation, he drank damnation to me and my men, whom he styled cowardly puppies, saying he would neither give nor take quarter." And I'm going to start using cowardly puppies as an insult more often.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
Yeah. And then, according to Charles Johnson's account, Chris, you want to hit us with this one?
"Damn you villains, who are you? And from whence came you?"
The lieutenant made him answer, "You may see by our colors that we are no pirates." Blackbeard bid him send his boat on board, that he might see who he was, but Mr. Maynard replied thus, "I cannot spare my boat, but I will come aboard of you as soon as I can with my sloop."
That's pretty badass.
Yeah.
That's pretty badass.
Upon this, Blackbeard took a glass of liquor and drank to him with these words. Chris?
"Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarters or take any from you."
In answer to which, Mr. Maynard told him that he expected no quarter from him, nor should he give him any. So, surprisingly gentlemanly, a lot of chest thumping.
Just shouting at each other
Yeah.
and drinking.
Just shouting at each other and drinking. To be fair, we do that, but we're not about to fight each other.
Right.
And
Crazy, we made a podcast doing it.
yeah. Now, immediately after this exchange, this is when Teach opens fire. And he opens fire with the first and only broadside that he fires during this battle, directly into the bow of both of the oncoming vessels. Now, and it's immediately effective. It's immediately effective for a couple different reasons. Number one, you're hitting them with what's called a raking broadside. So every projectile you're firing out of these cannons is traveling the entire length of the enemy ship, from bow to stern. So you have the opportunity to hit more men as you're going by, you have more targets presented to you, and you have more of an opportunity to do damage to essential components of the ship. They also figure that all of Blackbeard's cannons were double-shotted, which means that they had not only a round ball, a round cast-iron solid-shot cannonball loaded in each gun, but in front of that was probably something akin to grape shot or canister, something they called swan shot, which is essentially a big collection of small musket balls. So to put a modern analogy on it, it's like taking a shotgun, putting a slug shell in, and at the same time putting in buckshot. So you have something that's going to do a lot of damage to the ship, and you have something that is just going to chop the crew to pieces.
Yeah, a lot of damage to the people.
Yeah, and these weren't even very big cannons. They were probably 3 or 4 pounders. The Adventure's small enough that anything bigger than that would have placed too much stress on the ship itself. That might have shaken it to pieces. But the numbers basically tell you it works. It's extremely effective. So on board the Ranger, the smaller of the 2 ships with the smaller of the 2 crews, of the crew of 24 men, 20 men are killed or wounded, including the death of Midshipman Hyde. Removes her from the battle, removes him as a command element. 1 broadside, 1 instant, and 5 out of every 6 of the men.
100-ton sloop.
Yeah.
This is a big boat.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's probably about the size of a city bus.
Yeah. But like, whenever we're talking about how this is a smaller vessel, just to put it into terms, it's still 100 tons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But this broadside just sweeps the decks clear. It just sweeps the decks clear. You have this big group of men standing there. You hear a bang, you see a lot of smoke.
And then they're not standing there.
And then they're not standing there.
Yeah,
83% of the men in this crew are now lying on the deck bleeding, because not only do you have this small shot coming through, cannonballs are hitting the body of the ship. They are sending big splinters flying out like another giant shotgun blast of, these pieces of sharp wood the size of daggers traveling at hundreds of feet per second. It's absolutely lethal. Now, the Jane, with Maynard on board, does not get the worst of it. He apparently has 9 casualties out of a crew of 33. Still pretty nasty. At this point, the Ranger falls off to starboard. Now, the Adventure, Blackbeard ship, drifts aground, either from a little bit of small arms return fire, cutting the ropes, holding the jib sail in place, or it might have been the recoil of the broadside.
Yeah, they're thinking that the popular theory is that he was so familiar with where he was, and he was such a skilled sailor, that it was actually the force of the rounds he put into the other boats that pushed his ship so far sideways
that it went up onto a sandbar.
Yeah.
So, knowing that the Jane draws more water than the Adventure, Maynard anchors his ship within 25 yards of Blackbeard's vessel, continues to fire with small arms, and there's just this exchange of musket fire going back and forth, because he knows that he can't then board the Adventure, because he'll run aground as well, and then he loses the initiative. Now, doesn't last long. Teach manages to get the Adventure off the sandbar, turns in, approaches the Ranger. Now, at this point, though, he sees what looks like a fairly empty deck on the Ranger. Thinks he has the advantage of numbers. There is one thing he doesn't know, though. What is that?
Everybody's waiting downstairs.
Exactly. He put over half of his crew below decks. They haven't been touched by the cannon fire. They're not going to be hurt by small arms fire. He sees a few men standing exposed on the deck of the Jane, moves to board her, thinks, I've got this locked up. One ship is out of the action, now I take the second one.
Yeah, the first one was easy. This one's going to be just as simple.
So, he approaches the Adventure in, orders his men to throw granados, early grenades. Think a miniature version of that big giant bomb with the fuse on it that Adam West's Batman was running around with.
That's actually a really good description of it.
It's like a grapefruit-sized version of that.
Yeah. It's the precursor to the modern hand grenade. So think a hand grenade with a Bugs Bunny fuse.
Yeah. It's crude, but if it's used right, it can be extremely effective. In this case, it wasn't.
No.
The deck is relatively empty. Now, if they'd gotten one down the hatch of the Jane into all the men below decks,
that probably would have changed the tide of the battle.
We would be having a very different conversation at the moment.
They're not just explosives. They're filled with nails. They're filled with shot. They're filled with glass. Anything
stones.
You pour into these things, and it's shrapnel that gets you. It's from what historians say, a very unpleasant thing to be facing.
Yeah. So Blackbeard's Blackbeard moves the Adventure in, grapples with the Jane. Some say he actually reached out and grabbed the Jane's foreyard himself and pulled the ships together. Probably apocryphal. It's a cool image, though. That's why I wanted to include it.
Yeah, I like to think that he did.
Yeah.
This dude was nuts.
Sees that Maynard's few men remaining above deck have moved to the stern of the ship, and with about 14, 15 of his men, they jump onto the deck of the Jane and move to attack Maynard's men. At this point, this is where Maynard calls his remaining guys up.
He springs the trap.
Yeah, he springs the trap, and Blackbeard walks right into it. And this is the point they emerge from below decks, up the ladder. Maynard had the hatches removed to facilitate this, and then they hit Teach's men in the rear. Now, Charles Johnson talks about this. He gives probably the most dramatic version of what happens, and it's the one I like to quote because it is kind of fun. He talks about Teach and Maynard singling each other out for a face-to-face duel.
Yeah, that's the kind of the iconic painting.
Yeah.
Is of those two fighting one-on-one while there's this big battle where nobody's really paying attention to them.
Well, and Johnson is a guy who today would have probably made it pretty big as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
They move towards each other. They exchange pistol shots. Blackbeard misses, Maynard doesn't. But Blackbeard gets hit with a pistol shot, is barely phased. Now, according to the Boston Newsletter, the encounter continues thus. Maynard and Teach themselves began to fight with their swords, Maynard making a thrust, the point of his sword going against Teach's cartridge box and bending it to the hilt. Teach broke the guard of it and wounded Maynard's fingers, but did not disable him, whereupon he jumped back, threw away his sword, and fired his pistol, which again wounded Teach. Now, as this is happening, the fight between the Royal Navy sailors and Teach's crew seems to be going the way of the guys in the Navy. Teach's men get driven back, probably through superior close-range firepower and superior training of Maynard's guys. They're driven back, their casualties mount. Most of Maynard's crew then moves in to surround Teach. And this is where he's in trouble. He tries to finish Maynard off, but at this point, according to Charles Johnson, one of Maynard's men gave him a terrible wound in the neck and throat. According to the Boston Newsletter, DeMelt struck him between them with his sword and cut Teach's face pretty much. They're referring to Abraham DeMelt, who was this famous Scottish Highlander member of Maynard's crew, who was known to fight with a large basket-hilted claymore. This is a heavy, big sword. And for some reason, I can't stop picturing this guy as Billy Connolly. I don't know why.
Okay, I like it.
Just running up, you're a very naughty pirate.
Yeah,
I'm going to hit you with my sword. Oh, no. Oh, I've stepped on a jobby. I don't know. I can't get the image out of my head.
It went a little fat bastard there at the end. I'm fine with that. Like, I'm good.
That Blackbeard kind of looks like a bearded baby.
Like a baby.
So, back to Charles Johnson. Teach stood his ground and fought with great fury till he received 25 wounds. 5 of them by shot. So, in the course of this fight, Teach takes 5 musket balls, 20 sword wounds. And then
one cut his face pretty much.
One cut his face pretty much. And then Charles Johnson kind of steps away from the whole melodramatic aspect of it and then hits us with this denouement. At length, as he was cocking his pistol, having fired several times before, he fell down dead. That is the extent of how Charles Johnson talks about Blackbeard's death. That he fell down dead. 4 words. Now, the Boston Newsletter takes it to a better extent. One of Maynard's men, being a Highlander, engaged Teach with his broadsword, who gave Teach a cut in the neck. Teach saying, "Well done, lad." The Highlander replied, "If it be not well done, I'll do it better." With that, he gave him a second stroke, which cut off his head, laying it flat on his shoulder. Well, so that's some imagery there. And at this point, so dies Edward Teach. So dies the famous Blackbeard. So at this point in the battle, 8 of Teach's 14 crewmates that joined him in boarding the Jane had either been killed or seriously wounded. The remainder surrender. By this time, Ranger has recovered from the devastating broadside she'd received earlier, moves to the Adventure's unengaged side, grapples, and the few men remaining on that on the Ranger board the Adventure and forced the remaining crew to surrender. And actually, in a tragic little final moment, one of the Ranger's crew was actually shot and killed by one of the guys aboard Jane who mistook him for a pirate.
Yep.
There is a second little bizarre part to this finale that involves a member of Teach's crew, a freed slave known as Black Caesar, who we might actually be doing, we'll talk about on future episodes.
Yeah, I think that was
He's an interesting cat. He was below decks with orders to blow up the powder store should the ship fall to the enemy. Now, if he had succeeded, all three of these vessels would have been gone.
Yeah, it's whenever the powder on one of these things goes, it goes.
And at this point, just about everybody on these three ships is on the Adventure. It's in the middle ship. These guys are probably going to be dead.
Yeah,
most of them, if not all of them,
are essentially tied to it.
Yeah. Now he's stopped by a pair of merchant sailors from a trading vessel that had actually come aboard the Adventure the night before after having an onshore party. Now they didn't get off in time for this battle to start, so they just stayed below decks. They stayed out of it.
They were likely hungover.
Probably.
Another tactical advantage that Maynard had over Blackbeard was his men weren't hungover.
No.
They weren't up all night drinking.
That's true. I know what that's like. So, at this point, the fight's over. It's time to tally the final butcher's bill. The best source we have for this is actually in a letter that Maynard wrote about 3 weeks after this action. He claims that on the Jane alone, he had 8 men killed and 18 wounded. So this is most of his men. And a total of 14 killed and 22 wounded is claimed by the official report of Governor Spotswood. So that is 36 out of 57.
Yeah, not great.
That's a high casualty rate. That is definitely a Pyrrhic victory. So Maynard remains off of Ocracoke for 2 more days, patches up the damaged ships, tends the wounded, buries the dead, takes the step of removing Teach's head fully from his body, dumps his mangled body overboard, and there is, of course, that famous legend that claims that after this body was dumped into the water, this headless body, it swims around the Jane several times.
And then it disappears. It sinks slowly beneath the waves.
Sinks beneath the water. So the 3 ships make their way back to Bath with Teach's severed head hanging from the bowsprit. 6 of Teach's men that are rounded up in Bath join the rest of their comrades that are captured at Ocracoke and taken to Virginia for trial. 16 men go to trial for their lives. 14 of them are found guilty and meet the hangman's noose.
And those numbers they kind of fall in line with most of these trials for pirates.
Maybe they might not have been exactly fair, but it's the way things were. Now back to Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia. His men and Maynard's sailors gathered what goods could be found on the Adventure and in Teach's home in Bath. They auction them off. They get a total value of 2,238 British pounds, about $500,000 in today's money, which upsets Governor Eden because they're basically stealing North Carolina goods.
Right.
And that turns into a whole thing.
That he would have stolen himself.
And
that's bullshit.
And we will get into that when we do our William Eden episode. Most of that money is taken by Spotswood himself to cover the cost of the operation. The rest that remains goes directly into his wallet. Mm-hmm. Right in there. Now, there were prizes on offer. There were rewards on offer for the death of Blackbeard. Total rewards accrued by Maynard and his men were about 400 pounds, about $85,000 in today's money. Here's the kicker. It's shared by all of the men. Not all the men involved in the action off of Ocracoke Inlet. It's shared by all the men in the crews of both the Royal Navy frigates that were the source of Maynard's strike team. The vast majority of which were not present for this action, played no part in the death of Blackbeard. But that's the way the prize money system worked in the Royal Navy. And the second kicker is they got this money, but for the most part, it was tied up in adjudication, so they get it 4 years after the fact. 1722, they finally get this money.
Gotta love the red tape.
Gotta love the red tape. After this,
we can do an episode of whenever these dudes finally get paid. If this is still a thing.
Yeah, maybe.
That's something to aspire to.
It really is.
Dudes finally get paid for not dying at Blackbeard's steely hands.
Mm-hmm. So Robert Maynard, after this is over, continues his service in the Royal Navy. pretty much serving without further acts of extreme heroism or further notoriety. I don't want to say he faded into obscurity, but we don't hear much from him.
Yeah, I mean, he did become a captain.
He did become a captain, which is...
he had a pretty good career.
A pretty good gig, based off of the sparse Admiralty records we have of him. And then he dies in 1751 at the then ripe old age of 66. So it seems like he went on to have a pretty good life. And, I mean, this is just a...
Does it say where he died?
He died in England.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I wondered if he stayed in the colony.
He is buried at the church in Deal, which is on the coast of Kent, which is a few miles up the coast from where he grew up, I think. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, he died a comfortable death at home in bed and was kind of buried in his hometown. And from this point forward, November 22nd, 1788, kind of considered, as you said, to be the end date of the golden age of piracy. I mean, despite the fact that many notorious pirates are still free at this time, they continue to operate
it was far from over. But this kind of marked the beginning of the end. The Navy now really has the upper hand, which was kind of an inevitability at the time. It's the Navy.
And the thing I love about this whole story is what a close run thing it was. Blackbeard almost succeeded. Now, if he'd fired a second broadside, or if one of these cannonballs had hit the mast of the Jane, or if, two more men had come aboard the Jane with him.
Blackbeard was very much in love with his own persona.
Yeah, and his own mythos.
Yeah, so it was pretty easy for Maynard to get him to bite.
Mm-hmm.
All he had to do was just hide dudes.
Yeah. Well, and also Blackbeard could have run. Mm-hmm. He could have taken off into the dunes. He could have gone overland.
Yeah, but he was already doing shots in front of the guy and calling him a puppy.
Yeah.
Once you've thrown puppy out, that's like if you call somebody a clown.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. It's over. There's no coming back.
You're going to have to fight.
Yeah.
You're going to have to fight. And I think he had a moment where he stopped and he went, if I defeat 2 Royal Navy ships, I will never have an enemy crew resist me again.
Yeah.
Because when you defeat a bunch of merchantmen, it's one thing. If you capture a lot of ships, it's one thing. If you beat the enemy that's hunting you, if you defeat them, if you kill a lot of them, your legend is cemented. Your legend is cemented. Now, what would have happened to Blackbeard had he not died that day? I don't know. But I know that if he had won the Battle of Ocracoke Inlet, it would have gone absolutely into legend. People would have been telling that story for years.
Yeah, that would definitely have been a real sounding point.
Well, yeah, and God knows how much more pirate stuff we were going to see at tchotchke shops in the Outer Banks.
Always. His house would be a museum if people didn't steal his house. After he died, people went over and just started taking things.
Mm-hmm.
They just started stealing furniture and shit. And whenever the furniture was gone, they're like, "Oh, we'll just take some of the walls."
Yeah.
And they just stole his house.
And not to mention all these legends of buried treasure in the Outer Banks and all these stories and all these myths and his place within popular culture. Mm-hmm. All the movies that have featured Blackbeard. The TV shows that have featured Blackbeard, or things related to it. And the amount of literature that is written about him.
Yeah, he seamlessly made the transition from history into popular culture.
Exactly. And he wasn't the most prolific of the famous pirates at this time, but you can see a lot of reasons why he is definitely the most famous.
Yeah, if you were keeping track with this timeline, he was not a pirate for very long.
No.
And that's
2.5 years?
You'll see that with a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
Very few of them retired.
Mm-hmm. 2.5 years.
Like Benjamin Hornigold was one of the exceptions. Like, he made multiple careers out of this.
Yeah.
And he was good at all of them. Like, he was a great pirate. He was a great pirate hunter. He was a great privateer. Like, he was outstanding at everything that he did.
So it was a lot of fun telling this story. It was a lot of fun to research, a lot of fun to think about. I started having Blackbeard dreams, which was kind of cool. But I think the most exciting part of this is how many other stories it opens up for us to tell.
A lot of the guys that we talked about, you're going to hear about them again.
Yeah. And I know this was a singular event we really talked about, plus a little bit of biographical information. Like I said, in the future, look forward to a multi-part series where we really dig into Blackbeard. And this is an episode that's going to be longer than our typical episodes, but it's our first full-length episode. We wanted to start off big. This is going to be kind of the end of the story we're going to tell today. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us, listening to our voices. Chris, I know that you have some social media links for people who may want to follow us and follow our content.
Lots of social media. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at podcasttrr. On Facebook, you can find us at Thieves, Rogues, and Renegades. On Instagram, we are TRRPod. And we really look forward to hearing from you. Please drop a comment, throw some likes around, share it if you like what you see. If you'd like to reach us directly, if you have something you'd like to have us mull over, something you'd like to suggest, please don't be shy about throwing us an email at trrpod@gmail.com.
And any and all feedback is welcome. Please do be nice, though. We are sensitive men.
I will block and report you.
And you can also find our YouTube page, which we will be adding more content to, at Thieves, Rogues, and Renegades. You can find me, Rob, on Instagram at Meatneck, MEATNECK, all one word. You can find me on Twitter at Meatneck2.
Yeah, if you want to follow me on Instagram, I don't know exactly why you would, unless you really want to see more pictures of Jack, the lovable show dog.
Our canine outreach specialist.
Canine outreach specialist. You can follow me on Instagram at Nightlife Commando.
And if you want to follow any of our ongoing pirate adventures, Chris?
Yes, please don't be shy about following us on Twitter at Renegades of the... I'm sorry, Twitter is at PGH Renegades. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Renegades of the Rotunda.
Excellent. Again, a very special thanks to all of you who listened to our preview episode, gave us feedback. We are very, very glad that you decided to put up with us. We hope you enjoy the episode today. Again, keep listening. Again, a very big thanks to our friends, the Bloody Seamen, Pittsburgh's greatest ever pirate punk band, for their contribution of some awesome music. I highly recommend you go on iTunes and find their albums Sail Hatin and Ahoy Motherfuckers. Guys, I think that's going to do it for today. Until next time, we invite you to hold fast.